Very good evening, sir. Sir, I'm
Fine.
Dr. Pawan Soni. I'm going to present the case today, sir.
That's fine.
Sir, am I audible? Yes.
Yeah, you're quite audible. So
Okay.
it's like a long case presentation.
Yes, sir.
See to it, your presentation has to be precise at the same time comprehensive.
Yes, sir.
It should be well structured and organized, and it should bring forth all the essential information. And at the end of the presentation, you have to summarize.
Yes, sir.
Summarize, and then after summarizing the history, you have to come out with diagnosis or a differential diagnosis.
Yes, sir.
We'll have a brief discussion. Then you go for clinical presentation. Then at
Okay.
the end of it, again, I'll be asking for final diagnosis. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And
Yes.
your presentation, preferably, it should not exceed 12 to 13 minutes.
Yes, sir.
At the maximum 15 minutes. Okay, so that we'll have enough time for discussion. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes. So good evening, everyone. Sir and colleagues. I'm going to present a case of a 37-year-old lady. She's para 2, abortion 1, and live 1. She is a homemaker from Madhya Pradesh. Came here on the postpartum day 20 with a complaint of decrease in urine output, that is immediately post-delivery. Informant being patient herself and her husband. I would like to begin my history with a recent pregnancy. That her pregnancy was detected 1.5 months after her last menstrual period date, on the 15th of August 2019 via UPT, and she was a booked case with a regular ANC checkup every month. The regular antenatal sonography was done, and which was claimed to be normal. No history of pedal edema, proteinuria, and raised BP at this pregnancy. During this pregnancy, quickening was felt at the 5 months of the pregnancy, and urine output was normal. That was 5 to 6 times per day and 1 time per night. On 2nd of April 2020, during her 8th running month of amenorrhea, she noticed per vaginal spotting of blood. No history of abdominal pain or no history of any excessive physical strain during this time. But she claimed that the movement was normal, and she consulted her obstetrician at this time. And after examination and sonography, she was advised for rest. After 3 days of this episode, she had one episode of vomiting at home. It was non-projectile, contains food particles, with a feeling of butt, with the dull aching, lower abdominal pain, with no perception of fetal movement at this point. She immediately consulted her obstetrician, and she was told to have a high BP recording. That was first time, and absent fetal heart sound. No history of any excessive bleeding per vaginal. No history of any seizures, altered sensorium, or blurring of vision at this time. She was referred to higher center. On next afternoon, she had a preterm vaginal delivery of stillbirth baby. She was aware of a placental abnormality of the fetus at this time. She had recordings and was given antihypertensive treatment for the same. She was given 2 units of transfusion on that day itself, and no history of any excessive bleeding post-delivery also. She remained anuric for 24 hours, and so on the next day, she need renal replacement therapy in form of hemodialysis, and she underwent hemodialysis to right IJV off catheter. She was on hemodialysis every alternate day for next 5 to 6 days, and received 3 more units of blood transfusion during this dialysis. She remained anuric even after 1 week of this pregnancy, and during this day, no history of any.
Hello, I'm not able to hear.
Her postpartum sonography was done 2 times to rule out any retained products. She was discharged after 1 week of this pregnancy, and she was continued on dialysis 3 times per week on OPD basis in view of anuria. No history of any fluctuation in the blood pressure during dialysis, any history of fever. No further blood products were given after discharge, and no history of any clotting of dialyzer or tubing. She remained anuric even after this time, and she underwent left renal biopsy on 20th of April 2020. That was on 18th postpartum day. 2 days later, she came in our further management. Sir, in course in the hospital, she continued on dialysis times per week in view of persistent anuria.
Can you wait a minute? Sir, actually, there is a lot of complaint that the audio is not clear. Can I switch off your video also?
Yeah. Yeah, sure, sure.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. So in the course in the hospital, she continued on dialysis 3 times per week in view of persistent anuria. So this is it with the history. I'm going for the further with the obstetric history, sir. She's para 2, abortion 1, and live 1. First pregnancy that was at the age of 25 years, that is 12 years before now. That was the full term lower cesarean section pregnancy. That was cause of the lower cesarean section was the obstructed labor with a breech presentation. Her baby was 2.5 kg male child, no immediate complications, and no history of any raised blood pressure, seizures, or proteinuria during this pregnancy, during that first pregnancy. Second pregnancy, that was 1.5 years after that first pregnancy, and she had a spontaneous abortion within 1 month of conception. The present pregnancy, that was 11 years after the first pregnancy, and they used intrauterine devices as a contraception for 11 years. And in between, they had a regular menstrual history in between, and that they removed intrauterine device 6 months before conception. Now, the family history, her mother and father did not have any comorbidities, and she did not have any maternal bad obstetric history as well as any paternal side bad obstetric history. Her husband is 38 years old, and her the single child was a normal growth till now, and she had a 1 younger brother who is enjoying good health. In personal history, diet is vegetarian, appetite is normal, bowel once per day, and bladder. Before this episode, she had a normal bladder habit with no history of any nocturia, but now she voided 2 to 3 times per day, but total urine output was around 30 ml. So summarize the history. Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Hello. Yes, sir. That is with the history. I would like to summarize the history, sir.
Yeah. Actually, there were a lot of interruptions in your presentation, actually, but somehow I could gather all the information. I don't know about others. There is some problem. The audio quality is poor. Somehow I was able to gather all the information. How do others feel?
Just a minute.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I am summarizing the history.
Yeah.
That we have a 37-year-old lady.
Yes.
It was para 2, abortion 1, live 1. Presented with the spotting of blood per vaginal, followed by preterm vaginal delivery of a stillbirth baby with a detection of hypertension at the same time, with that was followed by anuria, that was for 24 hours, needing renal replacement therapy and blood transfusion. Now dialysis dependent, 3 weeks postpartum with a persistent anuria. Hello.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is with the history, sir.
Yeah, fine. So what is your diagnosis at this stage?
Yes, sir. The diagnosis is acute kidney injury. That was KDIGO stage 3, anuric, dialysis dependent at this time. And the most probable diagnosis is acute cortical necrosis. And the second being the acute tubular necrosis due to that first differential is antepartum hemorrhage. The second is a preeclampsia. Third can be thrombotic antiphospholipid antibody syndrome.
Fine. I would like to correct your diagnosis. The first component of the diagnosis is quite true. That is a syndromic diagnosis, acute kidney injury. Even you can go on adding that pregnancy-related acute kidney injury, PRAKI. Pregnancy-related acute kidney. Even that would be a better option, more appropriate here. Otherwise, simply acute kidney injury.
Sir.
Number 1. The second component you should not come out with a pathological diagnosis here. Acute cortical necrosis doesn't mean any etiology here, doesn't denote any etiology, it's a pathology. So you should not bring acute cortical necrosis as a second component here. So first component of your diagnosis is the syndromic diagnosis, acute kidney injury or pregnancy related acute kidney injury, number one. Then rightly, I appreciate that you went on saying that akin stage 3. That's good. Next is that etiology. For this AKI, you want to give a differential diagnosis. So preferably you stop short with 3 possibilities. Okay. Then the pathological diagnosis and all, during the course of discussion only it has to come. You need not give an acute cortical necrosis in the diagnosis itself. Okay. So the syndromic diagnosis and the etiology for the syndrome. That's what is expected of you. Can you just put it in the order of priority for the etiology?
Yes, sir. Hello. Hello. Yeah. Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Am I audible? Hello.
You are audible, sir.
Yeah. Hello.
Audible.
Hello. Yeah, sir. In the etiological diagnosis, the first differential is the antepartum hemorrhage. And the second is the preeclampsia.
Wait, Pavan. I think sir is not able to hear you. Hello, sir. Okay. Sir had left. Sir is joining again. I think there is some issue with sir's internet also.
Hello. Yeah, sir.
Hello, sir, am I
Hello,
audible?
am I audible, sir?
Yeah, now
Sir, your voice is not clear.
Hello, so your voice is breaking, sir.
Yeah. Sir, are you logged in with two accounts? Because
hello.
hello.
Now the
Yes.
Wi-Fi connectivity is kind of fluctuating.
Okay. Sir, you are logged in via two accounts. Can I unmute one because I feel?
Yeah, you shut off the mobile one. You shut off the mobile one.
Okay, I'll shut off the mobile one.
Yeah.
Okay. Sir, are you clear now?
Yeah.
Hello, yeah, sir. Etiological diagnosis. The first my etiological diagnosis is the antepartum hemorrhage, form of abruptio placentae. Hello, hello. Are you
Hello.
audible, sir? Am I audible, sir? Okay.
Yes.
Second is the preeclampsia. Third, I have put the differential diagnosis as a TMA, that is thrombotic microangiopathy, and the fourth as a EPTA, that is antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, sir.
Okay. Can you just justify? And before that, in the presentation,
Yes,
it
sir.
was fairly okay. I mean, did you mention about the vaccinations?
Yes, sir. Actually, this was a book case, and I mentioned about the vaccination and the treatment. She has taken the medication in form of iron and calcium treatment, sir.
Okay. Fine. And does she remember the BP recordings during her pregnancy?
Yes, sir. She remembered every time. She remembered because the antenatal checkup was done regularly. And she remembered completely. That was told to be normal. The exactly value she is not remembered, but the told to be
That's
normal.
right. Yeah. So in any given case of pregnancy-related acute kidney injury, these are the points you have to remember. Number one,
Yes, sir.
whether there was an excessive vomiting suggesting hyperemesis during the first trimester. Number one, history of vaccination like TT,
Yes.
history of supplementation with oral iron and folic acid, and then
Yes, sir.
frequency of visits, booked pregnancy or not, and then any urinary tract infection, febrile illness,
Yes, sir.
and then history of consumption of any medications which due to some unexpected illnesses, and the blood pressure
Yes, sir.
profile, whether she was told to have proteinuria or not.
Yes, sir.
So some of
She
them
did not
are
have any
may be
proteinuria.
relevant to the given diagnosis, or some of them may not be relevant. So
Yes,
you
sir.
need not mention all these, but don't forget to elicit this history. And then
Yes.
through the pregnancy. That also is very important. Okay. What is the normal profile of weight gain during pregnancy?
Sir, up to 12 kg normal is abnormal.
The first up to
So,
first
to 12
7 months,
kg till
at least 1 kilogram per month, right? So roughly about
yes,
9 to 11 kilograms. That gives a clue, kind of. Okay.
yes, sir.
Right. I think fairly, I mean, you have mentioned everything and so on. So what is striking here? What is striking here? What is so abnormal here? You forget about
Sir,
it, the negative outcome later on. She's an relatively elder. Read most when the gravida is 37-year-old.
yes, sir. Sir, in the 37-year-old, there is very high chances of preeclampsia. As she is the third gravida, it is not that, but in the 37 years, there are more than 35 pregnancy. That is one.
Anything else?
And second, very
Not
high
related
chances
to
of
BP, no.
not related to, sir. Sorry, sir.
What is the risk for Down syndrome? Does it increase with maternal age?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. More than 35 years, the risk for the Down syndrome increases.
How do you screen for Down syndrome antenatally?
Sir, in the antenatally, we'll screen for the, we have to see for the that alpha fetoprotein. We have to see for the beta HCG level, and there are the 3 blood markers we have to see. And
fine. Of course, it is not nephrology, but I just wanted to know how tuned you are as a physician. No, that's important. So
yes,
the single most important worry on the part of the obstetrician when somebody is in the 4th decade of life becoming pregnant is one is Down syndrome. That's right. Okay. Of course, with advancing maternal age, preeclampsia risk is on the higher side. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Even though there is not much of objectivity on that, and it's a very common observation. That's fine.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what is the first etiological diagnosis you mentioned?
Antepartum hemorrhage, sir. Most probably likely abruptio placenta.
So what is the evidence for abruptio placenta in her?
Sir, the evidence is likely that is she is a 37-year-old lady first. The second, and after that she was diagnosed with the stillbirth and and need of 3 blood transfusion and on the day of delivery. That is maybe the
fine
etiological like.
So how do you explain it was only minimal spotting, but she warranted, she required about 2 to 3 units of blood?
That abruptio placenta, that is maybe if it retroplacental, there is any like coronal bleeding.
Concealed hemorrhage.
Excessive bleeding was there.
Okay. What is the other?
Hemorrhage was there.
What is the other common cause for antepartum hemorrhage?
Sir, placenta previa, sir.
How do you differentiate clinically between placenta previa and abruptio placenta?
Sir, in placenta previa, there is a profuse bleeding even during the pregnancy, and otherwise, the clinically that is on the placenta previa presenting with the gross
associated with pain, and which is not associated with pain.
Yes. Abruptio placenta associated with the pain, sir.
Yeah, placenta previa is painless. How do you express placenta previa otherwise? It is called essential hemorrhage. Abruptio placenta is called accidental hemorrhage. Okay. The abdominal pain and all will be very prominent in severe placental abruption. The blood loss is the same quantity in patient A and patient B, but patient A has got placenta previa, patient B has got abruptio placenta. Who stand at a higher risk for acute kidney injury? Same quantum of blood loss.
Abruptio placenta will cause higher chances of acute kidney injury. Because
you are right. Placenta previa, unless the hemorrhage is very profuse, and if you don't replace it, then only the patient goes in for AKI. Whereas abruptio placenta, even with moderate hemorrhage, there is a very high likelihood for acute kidney injury. Why?
Sir, the abruptio placenta, because it like bleeding occurs prior to the delivery, are major chances of having DIC in that type of pregnancy.
Pardon me? Say it again.
Sir, it higher chances of DIC, sir. Disseminated
No,
intravascular
no,
coagulation
no,
in the abruptio
no.
placental cases, sir. Okay.
In placental abruption, there is a release of thromboplastin-like substances.
Tissue factor, yes.
Entry into maternal circulation, the thromboplastin-like substances, that leads on to thrombosis and so on. Okay, so that is the idea. Got it?
Okay.
Fine.
Yes,
so
sir.
rupture placenta, the risk is pretty high. So you're right. That is the first possibility. I also would consider that one. Which is the second possibility?
Sir, I have put the second probability is the preeclampsia, sir.
Preeclampsia syndrome. Okay. What is the evidence for preeclampsia here?
Sir, she was first time diagnosed as the hypertension at the 28th week of pregnancy. That was after 20 weeks of pregnancy. That was might be severe hypertension. That because she needed 3 antihypertensive medications first, and second, she associated with the renal dysfunction. So she doesn't know about the proteinuria, but
there are certain important points you have to understand. What is the incidence of acute kidney injury due to preeclampsia?
Sir, the preeclampsia.
100 women of preeclampsia.
Sir,
how many of them will go in for AKI?
Yes, sir. Sir, in the primary gravida, that was higher. There is 7.5%.
No. Preeclampsia per se, eclampsia syndrome, even though it is a very, very, very commonly prevalent.
5 to 20%.
Fortunately, acute kidney injury complication is very, very less. At the maximum, even in the largest series, it is less than 3 to 4% only. Most of the books say it's only 1%. The preeclampsia syndrome, AKI incidence is very, very less. But in HELP variant of preeclampsia syndrome, the incidence of acute kidney injury goes up to 10 to 15% even. So unless it is a HELP variant, a pure preeclampsia, fortunately, acute kidney injury is not that common. Okay. Then the third possibility, what you said?
Sir, in the third possibility, I have said is a thrombotic microangiopathy.
Okay, fine. What is the evidence for thrombotic microangiopathy here?
Sir, the same. She presented with the renal dysfunction and the severe hypertension.
But thrombotic microangiopathy, you would not have antepartum hemorrhage.
Yeah, presented.
So, yeah, the presentation was antepartum hemorrhage. So, in all probability, it is abruption. Yes, and also, you have to remember, sometimes all these phenomena, there can be coexistence. Now, once there is abruption present, and the association with a higher blood pressure and little bit of element of TMA, and all sometimes can coexist because the unifying pathology, the dysfunction there is kind of an endothelial dysfunction that can be coexisting phenomena. So, but you have to give an etiology as which is the dominant factor or which is the initiator. That should be the etiology. Here, in all probability, it is abruption. Let us not talk about antiphospholipid antibody syndrome here because it becomes a kind of a theoretical possibility in this clinical scenario because there is nothing to suggest antiphospholipid antibody syndrome because she had a normal delivery in the past and there is no history suggestive of any major arterial or venous thrombosis or something like that, or there is no recurrent placental fetal loss and so on. So it is rather will not be in.
That's why I put it as the fourth actually, sir. Yes.
So you can omit that.
Okay, sir.
It's better to omit that because it does not go well with this clinical scenario.
Yes, sir.
So that's it. And now I would ask, certain questions.
Yes.
Out of all these conditions, which presents with anuria? How do you define anuria first of all?
Sir, the urine output of less than 100 ml per day for 24 hours, I'll define as anuria. Less than 100 ml per day.
Or no urine output for 12 hours. That itself can be anuria, complete anuria. So what are the common causes forget for a moment, let us digress from this clinical scenario. What are the causes for anuria where there is complete loss of urine output?
Sir, that is one is the bilateral obstruction, urinary tract obstruction, bilateral. The second is the vascular catastrophe, that is the bilateral renal artery stenosis, thrombosis.
Quite true.
Yes, sir.
And then?
And the other is acute acute cortical necrosis.
Cortical. And that is massive cortical, diffuse cortical necrosis.
Yes, massive acute cortical necrosis. Yes.
And very severe ATN usually does not present with complete anuria. It can happen if it is
Yes,
very, very severe. Otherwise, you don't get anuria. So anuria is a clue
Yes,
again for a cortical necrosis here. So now
cortical
if I
necrosis.
ask you what is the likely pathology here, then you can come out in all probability it is acute cortical necrosis. So don't bring in acute
Yes.
cortical necrosis as a second component of your diagnosis because that is not a disease. It is a histopathology. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So
Okay, sir.
that's fine. Now you go ahead with clinical examination and then we'll have further discussion later.
Yes. So on examination, patient is conscious, cooperative, and well-oriented to time, place, and person. Her height is 155 centimeter, weight is 60 kg. That BMI is 24.97 kg per meter square. Her temperature is 98.6 degree Fahrenheit, and pulse is 82 per minute with the normal force, volume, and tension. With all peripheral pulses are palpable. Her respiratory rate is 18 per minute. Her blood pressure on the right upper limb was 142 by 96 in the standing position, and left is 140 by 92 millimeter of mercury. With the she did not have any orthostatic hypertension or postural hypertension, and the lower limb BP was 150 millimeter of mercury systolic bilaterally. She does not have any pedal edema. She has a mild pallor, no lymphadenopathy, no cyanosis or no clubbing. She had an abdominal scar, and the lower abdominal horizontal scar of the previous LSCS was present. Right IG with DLC in situ with the exit site was normal, and she had engorged veins over the breast, no palpable lump over the breast, and back and spine was normal in the general examination, sir. And the systemic examination, and umbilicus was normal, inverted, stria was present, scar mark was present, and no dilated veins, hernia, or pulsation. And in palpation that was soft. Uterus was not palpable, sir, and no organomegaly as such. And the percussion liver span was 12 centimeter, all tympanic knot, and auscultation, no bruise or no venous hump, sir. In the CVS examination, inspection, apex impulse not visible, and no visible pulsations or dilated veins. But in palpation, apex beat was present on the fifth intercostal space inside the mid-clavicular line, occupying single intercostal space. No pulse and no any abnormal pulse or thrill was present. On the percussion, left heart border coincide with the apex beat, and the right border was retrosternal. In auscultation, first heart sound and second heart sound were normal, no any murmurs, and no any other added sounds. No any pericardial rub. In respiratory system, in inspection, trachea was central, and respiratory rate was 18 per minute, bilaterally symmetrical. In palpation, chest expansion was 8 centimeter, no tactile vehicle promises, and percussion resonant all over except the cardiac dullness. And in auscultation, bilateral vesicular sign, bilateral was equal, and no abnormal breath sounds was present. In central nervous system, he was conscious, oriented, and well oriented to time, place, and person. In cranial nerve, all cranial nerves were normal. Fundus was normal.
That's fine. Okay. What are the positive signs?
So yes, sir. In these, the fundus was normal. Otherwise, in the CNS, there was no any positive signs, sir. It was completely normal, sir. So blood pressure was 142 by 90 millimeter of mercury bilaterally without any postural hypotension, sir.
Okay.
142 by 90, sir.
That's fine. Okay. So that's normal or abnormal?
Sir, that was slightly high, but with the 3 antihypertensives, he was on already 3 antihypertensives, sir.
Yeah. In spite of that, it is 140/90, meaning very severe hypertension.
Yeah, sir. It was 140 by 90.
Fundus examination.
So fundus examination was normal, sir.
No evidence for hypertensive retinopathy.
No evidence for hypertension. So actually, she presented 20 days later, sir. So there was no any evidence of any acute hypertension.
Fine. Is there any possibility that hypertension during pregnancy might have been missed initially?
Yes, sir. Because if she has already prior, she had a hypertension in the pregnancy, and before pregnancy she was hypertensive, and then during pregnancy her hypertension will fall, but BP was fall, but it was in the normal range around 120/80, but still she was hypertensive if the normal physiology if it's considered in the pregnancy.
No, but she's not a non-hypertensive, no?
No, sir, she was
Yeah,
not.
sure.
She was not.
So yeah, you are right actually. So, sometimes the subtle elevations in blood pressure can easily be missed if you don't know the
Yes,
baseline blood pressure, right? The
yes, sir.
baseline blood pressure for some women may be as low as 90, 70, 170, and so on. In
Yes,
such a person, even 120 over 80 during second trimester is real hypertension.
it's
So we
real
may be under
hypertension.
the
Yes,
impression that it's quite normal and so on. So sometimes it happens.
yes,
So that you should not forget. Okay. So we think that the hypertension has occurred just before delivery and so on, but actually it might have been there for some time,
for some.
and because of it is well within less than 140 and so on, it might have been taken as normal by the
Normal.
obstetrician. So that point is always there. Can you just tell me as to why the blood pressure drops during pregnancy?
Sir, blood pressure actually drops because of there are the vasodilatation happen because of the relaxin and because of the decreased peripheral sensitivity with the angiotensin 2. So there are peripheral vasodilation that happen, and the one thing is that because of that the hypertension
Okay.
goes down.
Okay. Actually, during pregnancy, what is the blood volume or plasma volume? It increases,
Sir,
or
the plasma volume increases to around 50 to 80% of plasma volume increases to the pre-pregnancy level, and that was around 5 to 6 liters of plasma she gained during
so that's
pregnancy.
a paradox. In spite of there being increase in the blood volume,
Yes, sir.
the
Yes,
blood pressure drops. You are
yes,
perfectly explained. It's due to the reduction in the peripheral resistance, peripheral vascular
yes.
resistance, the insensitivity to the vasopressors.
To
Okay.
angiotensin.
What happens to renin level during pregnancy? Is it a low renin or high renin?
Sir, it is actually a high renin state, and that is renin and even aldosterone level is high during pregnancy, and that causes the salt and water retention. But because of this peripheral, it's
Why renin
insensitive.
goes up? Renin level goes up during pregnancy.
Yes, sir.
Why?
Why? Uh, Sir, actually not sure, sir.
Yeah, there are two reasons. There are two mechanisms of high renin level during pregnancy. One, there is extra-renal sources of renin. For instance, the ovary and the decidua, they also produce renin. Number one. Number two, there is more work for renin. So renin is called for. That renin substrate increases. What is renin substrate? Renin acts on what?
Uh, renin acts on actually.
Angiotensinogen,
Sorry,
right?
sir.
Angiotensinogen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah.
So angiotensinogen level increases during pregnancy. That is, the renin substrate increases, so renin is increasing. Why
Yes,
there is increased angiotensinogen in pregnancy? Because there is overproduction of angiotensinogen by the
yes.
liver due to estrogen.
Okay.
So estrogen stimulating liver to synthesize more angiotensinogen, and that is a stimulus for more renin production. That is number one. Number two, there is unconventional, non-traditional source of renin during pregnancy, that is decidua and ovary.
Yes.
So it is pregnancy is a high renin state, and pregnancy is a state of increased blood volume, but still the BP drops. That is the beauty of it. It is a paradox.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And this is because in spite of there being angiotensinogen 2 level is more, in spite of there being increased aldosterone, BP drops.
Yes, sir.
Only aldosterone increases blood pressure, angiotensinogen 2 increases blood pressure. Any other mechanism for less responsiveness to angiotensin 2 during pregnancy?
That one is the renin, sir. Sorry, relaxin is
Relaxin,
secreted
you
by the
already said. Relaxin, you said nitric oxide, you said
yes,
prostacyclin, you said
sir.
all that is okay. Anything else? Very
Uh,
interesting. Have you heard of the angiotensin 2 receptor? That's called AT1
yes,
receptor.
yes, sir.
Yeah, it has to be function.
Yes.
If at all, it has to be functional. It has to be assumed the heterodimeric form. But in pregnancy, it is more of monomeric form. So it is less effective.
Okay.
All these actually revert back to abnormality in preeclampsia. In preeclampsia, even the morphology, the phenomenon, the characteristic of this A2 receptor, it is a heterodimeric form receptor. So increased responsiveness to angiotensin 2. In fact, A2 level is normal or low in preeclampsia, but the BP is high because of increased sensitivity of the vasculature to angiotensin 2. So there is a receptor level also, there is a mechanism of low blood pressure. More of a predominantly it's a monomeric form of AT1 receptor. So that is another explanation. Fine.
Yes, sir.
And there is also a possibility during pregnancy, sometimes, subtle reduction in the kidney function can be missed out. Do you
Yes,
agree
sir.
with me or not?
Yes, sir. I'm agreeing. Completely
What is
agree.
the explanation for that?
Sir, because in the pregnancy, because of the increase in the renal plasma flow and increase in the GFR, that increases to up to 150
What is the
to
tune
200
of
ml per
increase in
minute.
renal plasma flow? What is the magnitude of increase in the GFR?
Sir, up to 50%, sir.
Both.
And because of the GFR,
Renal
GFR
plasma flow
increases to
increases
also
up to
50 to
70
80%.
to 80%.
Yes.
Okay. GFR increases to the tune of about 50%.
Yes, that's the same.
What is the mechanism of
Yes,
increased
sir. And because
GFR
of that,
during pregnancy?
sir, one is because of the increase in the renal plasma flow that causes the hyperfiltration and the recruitment of the all the renal reserve has been used.
Hyperfiltration.
And,
You would like to use the word hyperfiltration.
yes, sir, I used hyperfiltration.
What is filtration
during
fraction?
pregnancy.
What do you mean by filtration fraction?
So filtration fraction is
The GFR by renal
uh,
plasma flow. Does it increases? The filtration fraction does not.
Sir, actually, filtration fraction does not affect. Yes, it does not affect it in the
Ideally,
pregnancy.
even though there is increased
Yeah,
GFR,
but
it is preferable not to use the word hyperfiltration here, because hyperfiltration is one of the mechanisms of progressive kidney injury. Is it not? For instance, we talk about a scarred kidney, the remaining nephrons, they undergo hyperfiltration.
Yes, sir.
Over a period of time, they also go in for glomerulosclerosis and so on. So hyperfiltration is injurious to the glomerulus, and that is a pathology. A supranormal GFR by increased filtration fraction is a pathology. But here, a supranormal GFR, but it is a physiology. So what is the formula for GFR and which component increases in GFR in pregnancy?
Sir, single nephron GFR, that is the KF, that is the ultrafiltration coefficient
KF into
the delta P, minus delta pi, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So which component gets altered, resulting in increased GFR during pregnancy?
Because of the plasma volume is high, that is the delta pi
increases,
decrease, sir.
you call it as hyperfiltration. That's what happens in most
decrease in
pathological
this
conditions.
pregnancy.
So here, the two major components which undergo change is increased KF and reduced delta pi. The oncotic pressure decreases. But some authors, they conclude there is a subtle increase in delta P as well. Okay. Why this point is very, very important. Why I'm saying that is that, suppose during pregnancy, if there is hyperfiltration, so 9 months of hyperfiltration, meaning any multigravida will certainly go in for CKD. Suppose a lady has got 4 children, 4 into 9, 36 months of hyperfiltration, it will be enough to knock off the kidney. So that is the beauty of the physiological changes in kidney that is happening during pregnancy. So it is not the hyperfiltration that is happening in the reduced number of nephrons, where there is as an adaptation to a loss of functional mass that happens in certain pathological conditions. Okay, that's right. And then you said aldosterone level is up in the pregnancy. Yeah, that's pretty right. Angiotensin 2 increases. Aldosterone increases to the tune of 2 to 3-fold of upper limit of normal.
Yes, sir.
And the rise in aldosterone starts as early as 8th week itself. Okay. Despite that, the BP is low. That is the beauty of it. Okay. When the aldosterone is more, what do you think is happening to the sodium milieu in pregnancy?
Sir, because of the aldosterone, sodium absorption increases, but because of the increase in the plasma volume, the absolute level of the
increase
sodium
in the sodium content of the body during pregnancy.
900 to 1000 millimoles.
Roughly about 1000 millimoles.
Yes.
Yeah. So when the aldosterone is more, do you expect hypokalemia as a normal change that happens during pregnancy?
Sir, The slight decrease in the potassium happened, but otherwise,
No, there is no hypokalemia.
evident
How there is
hypokalemia
no
was not.
hypokalemia despite 2 to 3-fold elevation in aldosterone?
Not sure, sir.
Anti-caliuretic effect of progesterone.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, progesterone negates the caliuretic effect of aldosterone. Okay, fine. Despite there being 1000 millimoles of sodium addition to the system, what is the normal sodium level during pregnancy?
Sir, around it's 130 to 135. That is lower.
There is a mild hyponatremia.
Yes, sir.
Why? Why?
Because of the increased plasma volume, sir. Even though the sodium is increased, absorption increased, but
So retention of fluid is more than the
increased
retention of sodium.
Yes.
That's number one. Any other mechanism?
Yes. Hyponatremia.
What happens to the threshold for ADH release in pregnancy?
Sir, it's shifted actually down that ADH secretions
ADH threshold is reduced.
less actually.
What is the mediator of this?
Yes, sir. Progesterone, sir. Progesterone itself.
Beta HCG. So the plasma osmolality is around 270.
Yes, sir.
Mild hyponatremia, mild plasma hypoosmolality, and normokalemia. Okay.
Yes, sir.
What happens to the uric acid production during pregnancy?
Sir, actually, absolute level of the uric acid in the first trimester it start decreasing, and up to the third trimester it comes to the normal limit.
Another paradox I'm going to
And
that is
yes, sir.
the uric acid
Production actually,
added to the system is more because the production is more because uric acid comes from the placenta as well, and the growing fetus
Yes.
also produces uric acid. But what is the normal uric acid level during normal pregnancy?
sir, it decreases to 3 to 4
Why
milligram
is it
per
happening?
deciliter from the 6. Sir, the excretion is high.
Increased clearance of the uric acid that happens.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, with all these background, now we'll go to this clinical case presentation here.
Yes.
Okay, you said abruption that leads on to anuria.
Yes.
Fine, but how this abruption causes anuric renal failure? What's happening? Can you just trace the sequence of events?
Sir, the abruption happens, and the first is the blood loss. Second can be the release of the tissue factor from the because of the placenta. Even trophoblast contains the tissue factor, and the release of the tissue factor work as a cofactor as for the factor 7, and it activates the factor 7 and then activate the factor 10 and 10A, and then the more thrombin generation and the thrombosis happen. The two situation as a DIC, and this happen in the small vessels of the
Can cause DIC,
kidneys have
it can
clogged,
cause
and because of
DIC,
that,
but even without DIC, it can cause anuric renal
Yes.
failure. As you rightly said, it causes a kind of a thrombotic tendency. If the thrombus happens, affects little larger artery, for instance, beyond arcuate artery and so on, there can
Yes.
be a major chunk of the cortex can go in for total necrosis. So it's
Yes.
kind of a basically it's a kind of a vascular thrombosis.
thrombosis.
And you know the pregnancy is a procoagulant
Procoagulant state, sir.
state.
Hello.
Pregnancy is a procoagulant state.
Procoagulant state, sir.
Yeah. So what is the evidence for procoagulant state of pregnancy?
Sir, in the pregnancy, there are 4 or 5 mechanisms that causes the procoagulants. That the increase in the coagulation factors. Second, the decrease in the fibrinolysis and the thrombomodulant function of the endothelium that start decreasing, and the platelet reactivity is high during the pregnancy.
Excellent. Excellent.
All this thing causes.
Yeah, excellent. So, actually, obstetricians will always give a word of caution. Even the upper limit of normal range of fibrinogen, you have to be
Yes, sir.
cautious.
Cautious.
Even the fibrinogen normal level during pregnancy, normal pregnancy is different from a non-pregnant state. Even near normal fibrinogen level, you have to be careful that there is something abnormal that's happening here.
Yes.
So it's a kind of a procoagulant state. So on top of it, thromboplastin enter into the system. It can cause vascular thrombosis and dysfunction, and all that happens. You're quite true, right? So you mentioned as preeclampsia. So preeclampsia, does it happen in the third? Actually, she said second gravida, is it not?
So
First
third gravida,
primary.
actually second pregnancy was lost in abortion 1.5 months after
Yeah,
conception.
I mean, how common you come across that in the third pregnancy?
Sir, very rare, sir. It's common in the primary gravida.
But here the risk factor is the advancing age.
8 years, sir. Yes.
If the paternity is the same, it is otherwise, third pregnancy, it
Yes,
is
sir.
rare. So what are the risk factors for preeclampsia to happen in third pregnancy?
If she has a prior diagnosis of the hypertension, or she is a chronic kidney disease or diabetic, if she has a maternal side of a complications of preeclampsia, or she had a child with the father of having the birth with the preeclampsia, or underlying systemic lupus erythematosus or APLA, that can be a
Quite true.
risk
Yeah,
factor for
pre-existing kidney
preeclampsia.
disease, chronic kidney disease, hypertension, and so on. Okay, and twin pregnancy,
Yes, sir, twin pregnancy.
and so on. And the preeclampsia risk is more in all these assisted reproduction and so on. Is that not? Yeah. So these are the risk factors. It doesn't mean that it cannot happen third pregnancy at all. It can happen in certain situations. Particularly the two most
Yes,
important, even if you forget the whole lot of it, is that pre-existing hypertension and pre-existing chronic kidney disease, or any other kidney disease, particularly the glomerular disease.
yes, sir.
Recently, any other risk factor is added for preeclampsia risk in a woman?
Change in the paternal, change in the father of the baby.
No, all that is well known. No, the latest addition is some
AT1
genetic
receptor
factor.
antibodies, sir. AT1
No,
receptor.
kidney donation.
Okay, kidney donation. Yes.
Yeah, this point is very important. So much so that whenever the donor happens to be a woman who's in the reproductive age group and still not finished a family, when you explain and counsel for kidney donation, you should have counseled on this particular point as well. There is
Yes,
a
sir.
heightened risk of preeclampsia if she becomes pregnant after kidney donation. It is not just science, it has got a lot of legal implications as well. Okay, fine.
Yes, sir.
But what is the paradigm change in the concept of preeclampsia, particularly the diagnostic criteria after the 2013 ACGO, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology Association
Yes.
Task Force guidelines?
Yes, sir. Previously, in the preeclampsia diagnosis, the proteinuria is must. But now in the different diagnostic criteria, that if patient does not have proteinuria, then if patient has hypertension and danger signs like thrombocytopenia, renal failure, or increase in the transaminases of the liver, then or the pulmonary edema or neurological signs, then she can be
Very
diagnosed
good.
as a
So that is a paradigm change. Proteinuria is not mandatory to make a diagnosis of. Yeah, when it was announced, actually most of the physicians, they were really upset. They didn't. It took quite some time for them to buy that idea.
Yes.
Okay, so proteinuria is not mandatory. That's what they said. Okay. Normally, what happens to the protein excretion during pregnancy?
Sir, normally it increases to the proteinuria excretion is increases, but it's not more than 150 milligram per day. If
Yeah.
it reaches more than 300 milligram per day, it is abnormal.
Quite true. Yeah. So that is because of the changes that happens in the pore size of the GBM. It is supposed to increase again. There are some hormonal mediation of increase in the pore size, and that results in that favors increase in proteinuria.
Yes,
That's
sir.
right. Okay. So how do you approach this particular patient? How do you investigate her?
Sir, first of all, I want to do the complete blood count in this patient, the complete hemogram of this patient. And in complete hemogram, I would like to see the hemoglobin level. I would like to see any thrombocytopenia is there or not. I would like to see the any signs of hemolysis or not. And this is the complete blood count. I can talk to the obstetrician to see the condition of the to inquire for the condition of the placenta. Placenta is infarcted and it's a small for this gestational age, then more it's likely evidence for the preeclampsia. Then
No. We are talking about investigations now. We are talking about investigation. You said complete hemogram, but you have not completed it.
Complete
You said hemoglobin.
Yes,
You said hemoglobin, platelet count.
Yeah.
Then
In time and hemolysis, and the type of hemolysis in the peritoneum. Then In the biochemistry, I would
No,
like
in the
to
peripheral sphere,
the
you
renal
look for
function and cystocytes, sir.
yeah,
Cystocytes.
schistocytes. Your voice is
Science of
breaking.
hemolysis, sir. Hello.
Schistocytes,
Yes, sir. Science of hemolysis, sir.
like
Cystocytes, sir.
anything else in the hemogram?
Uh, in the hemogram, that's it, sir. And the
Any role for reticulocyte count?
yes, sir. Reticulocyte count. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
That yeah. In the
So
reticulocyte
you have
count.
to classify this way: complete hemogram, then
Yes,
the DIC workup, and then intravascular hemolysis workup. So you classify the investigations. Then blood biochemistry,
blood biochemistry.
then sepsis screen.
And the
Sepsis screen is
Yes.
mandatory because most of the patients with pregnancy-related AKI, the primary and dominant cause may be something, and there can be a contributory factor of sepsis as well. You should never
Okay,
forget
sir.
to rule up sepsis. So intravascular hemolysis bundle,
Okay.
don't forget to mention reticulocyte
Reticulocyte
count, plasma-free hemoglobin,
Yes, sir.
and of course LDH.
LDH, bilirubin,
maybe. And the peripheral smear, it will be, if it is due to hemolysis, it will be normochromic normocytic, and then
Yes.
evidence for schistocytes are peripheral, the fragmented RBCs. If
Yes.
the number is more, it is more likely thrombotic microangiopathy. That's it.
Yes.
And then, of course, you have to do DIC workup,
Yes.
like prothrombin time and
Fibrinogen level,
PTT,
PT,
fibrinogen, and so on.
and
So
FDP.
that is DIC workup, hemolysis workup, and general CBC. So that then only you will not forget anything.
Yes, sir.
And of course, sepsis. So you have to draw urine. If this lady actually she is anuric, then blood culture wherever it is, particularly when there is leukocytosis and so on, and high vaginal swab. Okay, not to miss the puerperal sepsis as a contributor for infection. Even though that there is no evidence for that in this particular machine,
Yes.
in general I'm saying. And of
Yes,
course
sir.
you will do blood biochemistry, including liver function. Including liver function. Okay. Suppose if the liver enzymes are elevated, what do you
Yes,
infer from that in this lady?
Sir, liver enzymes elevated, like it goes toward the favoring of the HELLP, the HELP syndrome, like it's a severe stage of the preeclampsia. In that case, also the liver enzymes are elevated. And AFLP, but acute fatty liver of the pregnancy. But in the acute fatty liver of pregnancy, there is a severe rise in the transaminitis with the neurological symptoms in form of encephalopathy and coagulopathy.
What are the characteristics of AFLP?
AFLP, sir, like presented with the severe coagulopathy, with the severe liver dysfunction in form of rise in the transaminitis, and the second thing is the encephalopathy in this patient.
Quite true. Even it can cause acute fulminant hepatic failure.
Yes, sir.
And coagulopathy is more prominent rather than thrombocytopenia and proteinuria and so on. And hypertension may or may not be there. It will not be very prominent at all.
Yes.
The only treatment for AFLP is?
Sir, delivery is the treatment for
early delivery. If you delay,
early delivery.
It is. I mean, it can be notorious disease. You know, early identification and delivery is very important. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, do you think HELP is really a variant of preeclampsia, or is it a different disease? The traditional teaching is HELP is a severe form of preeclampsia. It's a variant of preeclampsia. But
yes, sir.
Is it so? Do you agree with this traditional teaching? In what ways HELP is differing from a classical preeclampsia, eclampsia syndrome?
Because the recent diagnosis also like.
No, do you get my question?
Are already there in the diagnosis.
No, do you get my question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Is it different or is it same preeclampsia?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain points to ponder over, but HELP may be a different disease because number one, the incidence of acute kidney injury is pretty high in gross deferment with preeclampsia. Preeclampsia is only 1 to 2%. Here is up to 15% you can have. Number one. Number two, evidence for significant inflammation and injury in the liver, which is not a feature of preeclampsia. generally.
Okay.
Number 3, a significant proportion of health patients, hypertension will not be severe, very subtle elevation blood pressure. Up to 20% of them, there is no proteinuria at all. Okay.
Yes.
And also there is evidence for activation of complement, at least in a substantial proportion of HELP. Whereas such a phenomenon is not observed in simple preeclampsia. And also there is evidence for activation of the coagulation system in HELP, which is not a phenomenon of preeclampsia. So based on all these things, current investigators in the field are pondering over whether HELP is a kind of a different disease, all that. But please remember the thrombotic microangiopathy, atypical HUS, thrombotic microangiopathy, acute fatty liver pregnancy, and HELP variant of preeclampsia. And all these things, there is only one important linking pathological phenomenon. What is that? Pathophysiological phenomenon. That is
Sir, the abnormal
endothelial
presentation,
function.
that is endothelial dysfunction, generalized endothelial dysfunction.
So sometimes in a given particular patient, a particular given patient, you will not be able to delineate which exactly, what exactly is happening in her, which pathology is happening here. Because
Yes, sir.
all these diseases share one common pathophysiological abnormality, that is endothelial dysfunction. They all may coexist. Hypertension and thrombocytopenia, evidence for mild subclinical DIC, and all that. There can be coexistence of all this. We have to understand that there is an endothelial dysfunction that is primary. And you brand a particular disease based on the dominance of the phenomena favoring one particular entity. That's it. Okay. And all these diseases, they have very poor outcome. But distinction of atypical HUS bar TMA is very important because what is the reason?
Sir, atypical HUS, atypical HUS with the TMA, sir. Differentiation between?
Yeah. Atypical HUS bar TMA, no, thrombotic microangiopathy, atypical HUS. Identifying that is important because
atypical HUS.
Inducing labor is not mandatory.
Not the treatment.
It is not mandatory. Whereas in severe preeclampsia, if it is uncontrolled hypertension, patient is worsening, without worrying about the fetal outcome, you have to plan a quick delivery. And AFLP, every minute is important. Earlier you terminate or induce labor, the better. Whereas if the disease is atypical HUS and if the pregnancy is very precious pregnancy and the fetal maturity is not yet attained, say for instance, in a given case, the obstetrician feels if you are able to sustain pregnancy for 2 more weeks, you can save the fetus. And in that situation, if you are pretty sure that it is atypical HUS, you can initiate plasmapheresis and you can sustain. Whereas in other diseases, if the disease is worsening, there is no way that you can think of the fetal outcome. You have to immediately plan a delivery. That is the only difference. Okay. Sometimes, this hair splitting differentiation of one entity from the other is pretty difficult. One pathology may start and the other pathology may supervene and so on. As again, I'm reinforcing the fact that the one underpinning pathology here is endothelial dysfunction and endothelial injury. Fine. Yes. Then you said she underwent a kidney biopsy.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you said ultrasound has been done. Normally, what is the ultrasound finding in pregnancy? Normal pregnancy.
The normal pregnancy, the ultrasound, it's like they're seeing the amniotic fluid, the quantity of the oligohydramnios or polyhydramnios.
No, kidney. I'm talking about kidney.
The fetus. Okay, kidney. Normal ultrasound, normal pregnancy, native kidneys, that is maternal kidneys, bilateral hydronephrosis, more side on the right side of the hydronephrosis.
What is the kidney length?
Sir, kidney length increases to 1 to 1.5 centimeter during the pregnancy.
So kidney volume increases, is it not?
Yes, sir. Volume increases.
What is the mechanism? Why kidney volume increases during pregnancy?
Sir, because of the increase in the renal plasma flow. The increase in
is it just that?
And the second, because of
vascular and interstitial component of the compartment of the pregnant, kidney increase. Okay, the nephron number remains the same. It wouldn't.
Okay.
It cannot increase at all. But the vascular and the interstitial volume increases, and the length increases by 1.5%. You said there is hydronephrosis, which is seen as high as 80 to 90% of the patients. What is the mechanism?
Sir, the hydronephrosis is because of the decrease in the ureter contractions because of the prostaglandin. Second thing is because of the obstruction, because of the obstructed iliac vessels or the increasing the uterus that can
Right.
increase
It
the
actually
ureter.
it will be thought, what is the role of a progesterone and relaxin, which causes dilatation of the relaxation of smooth muscles and of the urethra, and that causes it. But now, which is more favored mechanism of this thing? It is
compression by the iliac vessels and
particularly more common in the right side because it enters into the pelvic inlet at an acute angle, where it is crossed at an acute angle.
Yes.
Okay. And do you think hydronephrosis happens in a pregnancy who has undergone a ureteric diversion with the iliac conduit?
Not sure, sir.
It is not observed. That is why they have come to a conclusion that it's more than progesterone and relaxin and causing dilatation of the smooth muscles and all that. It is obstruction. Okay. And similarly, a pelvic kidney which is sitting within the pelvic cavity and the lady becomes pregnant, nothing happens. Okay. So these are the two elegant observations where the iliac conduit, without entering into the pelvic brim, the ureter enters into the conduit. There is not much. So there is a role of the vascular crossing and obstruction that is more supposed to be dominant. Okay. Okay. Why we should know about all this? What is the clinical implication of these ureteric dilatation and hydronephrosis?
Because patient present with the acute flank pain during the pregnancy, and we found that hydronephrosis
can hold 200 to 300 ml of urine, which is not normal because the dilatation of the ureter, there is extra urine that is staying over there. It's a kind of a stasis over there.
Yes, sir.
That is what we are worried. What is the worry?
That infection, that is cystitis can cause more like pyelonephritis because
quite true. So asymptomatic bacteriuria in a pregnant woman vis-a-vis asymptomatic bacteriuria in a non-gravid woman, who is likely to have acute pyelonephritis?
Yes, sir. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the risk of acute pyelonephritis is pretty high in a pregnant woman.
Pretty high in this, yes, sir.
Asymptomatic bacteriuria, 40% of them will go in for acute pyelonephritis. Yes. So normally asymptomatic bacteriuria you don't treat. Exception is pregnancy, because if a pregnant woman has asymptomatic bacteriuria, the risk for worsening, developing into acute pyelonephritis is as high as 40%.
Very high.
The reason is this: there is a stasis of urine. About 200 to 300 ml of urine is held in the dilated system. So that's what's happening. Okay. Yeah, of course. Yeah, imaging you do, and anything else you do before doing a biopsy. Normally, when do you do biopsy in AKI? What is the indication?
Sir, AKI, that if we are not sure of the diagnosis. The second is the persistent anuria, that for more than 2 to 3 weeks, persistent anuria or oliguria, the indication for the biopsy. Or if the patient has systemic features of the systemic illness, that like nephrotic proteinuria or active sedimentation.
Pathology. And when you discuss anuria, you didn't mention about a severe crescentic glomerulonephritis presenting as anuria. Is it not?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Severe crescentic glomerulonephritis can present as anuria. So when you have a suspicion, when there is a hematuria, you will not waste your time. You'll go ahead doing kidney biopsy very early, within 48 hours itself, or stabilizing the condition. But in general,
yes,
in AKI, particularly following hypotension, blood loss, and all that, you just wait, thinking that it is ATM. But here, urine output has not improved in the 3rd week. You're right. What is the imaging which can tell you the pathology? Any imaging you would envisage before doing kidney biopsy, apart from ultrasound?
Yes, sir. Apart from ultrasound, I would like to do the contrast enhanced CT scan if possible, and then it give me a Ream sign, that peripheral Ream sign in the cortical necrosis if it's present there.
Fine. So, what is the likely kidney pathology?
Hello. So your
What
voice
is the
is breaking.
likely kidney pathology? Are you hearing
It's
me?
yes, sir. It's here. It's acute cortical necrosis
Acute cortical
because
necrosis.
these.
Okay, in
Yes,
cortical necrosis, can you just describe the kidney histopathology in cortical necrosis?
sir, in light microscopy, we cannot identify the structures because it's like all necrosed out. So in the cortical necrosis, in light microscopy,
Yeah,
all
you have to
the
look at the glomerulus. The glomerulus, you know, you are very well attuned about the glomerular architecture and structure. All that will be lost. It's not the
lost. Yes,
structural details of the glomerulus will be lost and so on.
yes,
And it depends on the timing of the kidney biopsy. If you do little later, or only the outlines of the glomeruli will be seen, which are referred to as
peripheral
ghost
Ream sign.
glomeruli. Ghost glomeruli. Nothing else will
Yeah,
be seen
ghost
inside,
glomeruli. Yes.
and so on. Okay. So that's the cortical necrosis. Okay. Can you just tell me the difference between acute tubular necrosis and acute cortical necrosis?
Sir, clinically acute cortical necrosis long time, while acute tubular necrosis like can have anuria, but in the most cases it might not have the anuria. The cortical necrosis, the blood supply, the abrupt decrease in the blood supply, or endothelial injury that causes the thrombosis. So completely decreasing the blood supply
So
to the kidney,
pathologically,
mainly the
acute tubular
cortex,
necrosis.
that decreases
Acute tubular
supply.
necrosis.
Yeah.
Pathologically, the glomerulus is absolutely normal.
Normal.
Afferent and efferent arterioles are absolutely normal.
Yes.
Okay, even interstitium remains healthy, normal. It is only the tubular epithelial cells that have undergone necrosis. Whereas in acute cortical necrosis, it does not differentiate which component is there in that particular area of the kidney. It is the death of a portion of the kidney, particularly which is happening in the cortex. A chunk of cortex goes away. Based on the degree of involvement, it is the multiple classifications are there, no? Focal, confluent, and patchy, and diffuse. And diffuse meaning, so the whole chunk of cortex dies. That's why the prognosis is very poor. It is just knocking off the kidney. Whereas in ATN, the whole lot of structure is retained absolutely normal. It's only the necrosis of the cells lining the tubules, and which have got a potential to regenerate. That's why the prognosis is relatively good over there. Whereas an acute cortical necrosis is the death, necrosis of a portion of the kidney, particularly the cortex. And the cortex is the one which harbors all the glomeruli. When the glomeruli are knocked off and subsequently the tubules also will go away. It also dies off. It does not differentiate as to which component, which compartment is dealing with.
Yes,
the reason being severe vasospasm or thrombosis happening at the relatively major artery, relatively bigger artery. It's not just afferent arterial alone. Okay, that's it. Okay. And why is this happening here in pregnancy? Pregnancy is a state for, it's a very vulnerable state for developing acute cortical necrosis. Why?
Yes, sir. So, as this patient, like pregnancy is the state of procoagulation, that like highly.
It's a procoagulant state. Which, can you just name the elegant experiment which explains this phenomenon? Or the animal model for acute cortical necrosis? Hello, are you hearing me?
Yes, sir. I'm hearing. I don't know, sir. Animal models for this.
Yeah, it is Schwarzman reaction. Sonarelli Schwarzman reaction. You might have heard about it.
Yeah.
Schwarzman.
Yeah, I have heard about it.
It's very elegant experiment. What did he do? It is the intravenous administration of endotoxin.
Endotoxins, yes.
Lipopolysaccharide into a non-gravid mouse. I stand to be corrected, mouse or rabbit. Yeah. Actually, it required 2 administrations to cause renal cortical necrosis in a non-pregnant state. Whereas in pregnancy, A single
On a single.
administration of intravenous administration of endotoxin was sufficient to cause this. So highlighting the phenomenon that pregnancy is a procoagulant state. So it's already primed. Whereas in the non-gravid state, it requires a priming kind of a thing. The first dose of LPS that primes the inflammatory cells over there, and then the interleukins come into play, and there is endothelial dysfunction, and then second assault, second administration that causes cardiac necrosis, severe vasospasm. Thing is that severe vasospasm and thrombosis, that has to happen in artery.
Yes,
So
sir.
in a pregnant animal, gravid animal, even a single administration of intravenous administration of endotoxin was sufficient to cause this. This is called Sonarelli-Schwarzman reaction. Fine. Yeah. Can you diagnose massive cortical necrosis by X-ray KUB? Simple X-ray KUB.
Simple X-ray tube. Sir, in the chronic that cortical necrosis, the calcification happened, and we can see the calcification in the X-ray
Don't call
tube.
it as a chronic cortical necrosis, acute cortical necrosis. Fine. But I mean, your point is right. I mean, it takes time for the X-ray to demonstrate that. At least 4 weeks.
Yes,
Before that, it will not pick up. What do you see in the X-ray KUB?
the dystrophic calcification in the cortical area.
Very good. Where do you see, and what is the description?
Description, sir, I don't know. Like the cortical area in the
calcification, no? The two parallel lines. What are they? One at the periphery. There's a very thin rim of subcortical rim of kidney that is surviving because of some collateral supply from the adjoining vasculature. Very thin rim. See, for calcification, see, what type of calcification is this?
Dystrophic calcification.
Dystrophic calcification. A dead tissue, calcium comes into picture over there, it gets deposited in the dead tissue.
Yes,
but calcium has to come, meaning there should be a source of blood. No, it has to. It is hematogenously only it can reach over there, is it not?
Yes,
so
sir.
There is a thin rim of kidney that is surviving subcapsular by the collateral circulation. So the calcium stays over there. So that is one line. Second line is that at the corticomedullary junction. So this is this thing, but it takes, as you rightly said, it takes at least 4 weeks and so on, which is the most sensitive modality of diagnosis, imaging for making a diagnosis of cortical necrosis.
Contrast enhanced
CT. There are some centers, they routinely do this, but there are some centers, they vary of this procedure. Simple reason is that, we don't know really if there is any few nephrons, at least they survive, the contrast may hamper their recovery and so on. But yeah, I mean, it's it's not controversy, but some people, it's a kind of a routine of that particular experience or wisdom of that particular unit to whether to do it or not. Okay, that's right. And then biopsy is the gold standard.
Yes.
Okay. Biopsy is important in this situation to plan further action, is it not? Yeah, you have to create a permanent vascular access or CAPD, that kind of a thing, and you have to prognosticate and you have to explain and all that. So it is right, in third week itself, doing biopsy is very much justified. So prognosis is poor. If the cortical necrosis is patchy, what will be the clinical course?
Sir, in the patchy cortical necrosis, patient may improve over the time of up to 12 weeks.
May not touch the baseline. There may be partial recovery. At least the patient may become dialysis independent for some time.
Independent.
Later on can go in for. And there are instances where even the creatinine touches 1 milligram, and the biopsy also does not reveal any cortical necrosis. But later on, patient presents with CKD a couple of years later. The explanation is that very few foci of necrosis, which our core of biopsy has missed out cortical necrosis, and that can lead on to CKD later on. So just because somebody's creatinine touches baseline doesn't mean anything in this scenario. So the likelihood of cortical necrosis is pretty high in pregnancy. So which other pregnancy-related complications can end up in cortical necrosis? One is abruptio placenta, and then
if your placenta and the IUFD can cause the DIC and
DIC of any cause.
Yes, sir.
Yes, DIC of any cause like intrauterine death.
Yeah, fetal death and cause.
Severe preeclampsia, eclampsia syndrome, severe can cause.
Yes.
TMA can cause thrombotic microangiopathy.
Yes, sir.
It can cause cortical necrosis.
Cortical necrosis.
Most of these pathologies, most of these etiologies related to pregnancy complications, pregnancy-related complications can end up in cortical necrosis. Which is the most important non-pregnancy cause for cortical necrosis?
Sir, non-pregnancy, it's a sepsis.
No, more than sepsis. More importantly, sepsis doesn't lead on to cortical necrosis all the time.
Yes, sir. Like in the burns or the snake bite or
snake bite.
Yes, sir.
Snake bite is the most common cause, most important cause.
Yes,
There are also the same things happen, there's a lot of endothelial dysfunction and thrombosis and all those things. Snake bite and the obstetric catastrophes. These are the two main causes for cortical necrosis in the tropics.
Yes,
of course, there are so many other causes, certain poisonings and also all those things. All those are lesser number, but these are the two important these things. Even a septic abortion can cause cortical necrosis in the first trimester. Septic abortion, okay, amniotic fluid embolism. There are so many
amniotic
things can cause. So, so can you go for transplant in her?
Yes, sir. Sir, first I would like to wait for up to 12 weeks. But if it's no improvement after 12 weeks, then I will go for the transplant in her.
Fine. If the peripheral smear has shown lots of fragmented RBCs and there was severe thrombocytopenia, and you considered TMA as a contributor for this.
Yes, sir. I will consider.
How your plan of action will change?
Sir, planning that I would like to.
Is it possible that your biopsy may miss TMA?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, quite true. So, the actual TMA, what do you demonstrate in the histopathology kidney?
Sir, in the histology, we can see fibrin deposition and the thrombus in the capillary.
Afferent arteriole or glomerular, and then endothelial swelling and so on. It's all classic. But suppose if it is massive and coexisting other pathology and there is a massive cortical necrosis, nothing will be visible.
Yes, sir.
If you suspect TMA,
yes, sir,
how your plan of action will be different?
Sir, I would like to go for genetic analysis prior to transplant.
Yeah, that's
particular case with TMA.
Yeah, that's important because you have to prognosticate and you have to counsel accordingly because some of the variants, some forms of TMA is a very high likelihood for occurrence. But here, TMA as the primary etiology is rather unlikely.
Yes, sir.
Unlikely, but you have to remember that point as well.
Yes.
Okay, that's it. Okay, fairly well done. Any other doubts you would like to get clarified?
Sir, was only one doubt that you have already cleared, that in the diagnosis we have to mention first etiology, like syndromic, and then etiology, and then if we does not need to say about the pathological diagnosis in this case, right, sir?
Yeah, and that too in the history, if you say that she was told to have acute cortical necrosis and all that, no, most of the examiners may not like that actually. You should not talk about cortical necrosis in the history, even if the patient is educated enough to tell out that she has got cortical necrosis, but not to mention. You just say the clinical course, the presentation of anuria and severe renal failure, and the clinical background in which it has occurred, and the urine output has not improved at all over a span of 3 weeks. There is a strong suspicion that it may be cortical necrosis, but that should not be brought as a kind of a diagnosis. It's only pathology. There are diverse etiologies that can culminate in cortical necrosis. So, first is syndromic diagnosis, and then etiology, different diagnosis. I wouldn't appreciate antiphospholipid antibody syndrome here because 37 years and nothing has happened in the past.
Yes.
Better not to.
Only one history of abortion was that. That's why I would just put on the fourth.
After that, there's no evidence for that, and it's not a recurrent loss. And one successful pregnancy.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so it is rather not a good idea to implicate antiphospholipid antibodies from here. Okay.
Sir, can we take one or two questions if someone in the
Yeah, sure.
Nayan,
Yeah.
you had a question.
Sir, yeah, good evening, sir. Sir, in the investigations, you mentioned plasma-free hemoglobin. What exactly is that, and like how do you do it, and where else can you, and why do you use it, sir?
In our laboratory, it is routinely done. Actually, it's very simple. Your simple clinical pathology lab can do it.
Okay.
Meaning that it would not be positive 3 weeks after the pathology and so on. When it is happening, when it is ongoing, when there is a brisk hemolysis happening, the free hemoglobin can be demonstrated in the plasma. That's it. Most of the labs don't do it, but it has been a convention in our lab.
Okay, sir.
And preferably, it happens in intravascular hemolysis, not in the extravascular hemolysis.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Indicator. Okay. But actually, 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, after the disease and all that, it may not be possible.
Okay.
And similarly, reticulocyte count also, it has got its own limitations, but still, it is being done.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Manoj,
Hello.
you want to ask?
Yes, sir. What is your experience with plasmapheresis? This is one thing we have just heard, but I've not seen, sir. I think, sir. Just wanted to know. You said there is, sir, unless until we have done a biopsy and then TMA is proven, then only we can go ahead and do a biopsy, or
No,
clinical.
making a diagnosis of TMA, biopsy is not mandatory. You have to be very, very clear. Biopsy is not a must to make a diagnosis of TMA. TMA, it's a clinical and laboratory diagnosis rather than histopathological diagnosis. The triad of acute kidney injury, evidence for intravascular, microangiopathy hemolysis, and then thrombocytopenia, if it is there. You can go ahead with plasmapheresis, because in most of the instances, the patient's condition may not be conducive enough to undergo kidney biopsy. And if there is thrombocytopenia, is pretty severe. So it may be kind of a factor that may be deterring you to do a kidney biopsy. But in that, if you delay a kidney biopsy, you are losing the golden window of opportunity, because the early initiation of plasmapheresis is important. And after a couple of sessions or so, if the patient's condition becomes better and the platelet count crosses 1 lakh and so on, then you do up a kidney biopsy. And again, I'm saying you that, the thrombotic microangiopathy, sometimes there can be a discordance between the pathology and the clinical picture which you see. Sometimes you may miss out demonstrating a fibrin thrombi in a given core. Whereas clinically, patient may have severe renal failure. This we have seen again and again. So nothing like demonstrating in the kidney pathology, but I'm reiterating the fact that it is not mandatory to initiate plasmapheresis therapy.
Sir, there was one question in the audience. Actually, you mentioned about the AT1 receptor. Sir, in pregnancy, we have to understand that the AT1 receptor antibodies are also increased, and they are agonistic.
You're not audible. You're not audible.
Hello? Hello? Sir, am I audible now?
Please repeat. Please repeat.
Sir, can you again please explain the mechanism, what you mentioned about the AT1 receptor? Because we were to understand that the AT1 receptor antibodies are increased in pregnancy and they are agonistic antibodies. But still you said that the receptor, the receptor activity is reduced.
Quite, yeah. So I will explain. Let me explain that. The agonistic or activating antibody against this AT1 receptor happens in preeclampsia. That is the mechanism of increased sensitivity to angiotensin 2. Even though the angiotensin 2 level is lower than normal, the hypertension happens because of the presence of this activating antibody of this receptor. So the receptor sensitivity increases. What I said is that in the normal pregnancy, this AT1 receptor is not really functional. To be functional, to make the receptor more sensitive to A2, it has to assume the heterodimeric morphology. Here, it's a significant portion of AT1 receptor in normal pregnancy is in the monomeric form. In the monomeric morphology, it is not really sensitive, not that sensitive to angiotensin 2. That is why, despite there is a high A2 levels, there is no vascular reactivity to it.
Dr.
Am I clear?
Ishan? Yes, sir. Yes. Dr. Ishan, you had a question.
Yeah. Good evening, sir. Sir, actually, in pregnancy, can you tell, sir, in the kind of third trimester when a woman comes with a jaundice and low hemoglobin and thrombocytopenia, so, sir, is there any hallmark feature or we can differentiate between atypical HUS, TTP, and AFLP so that we can go ahead because the treatment are different for each of them.
That's what,
Because sometimes it is confusing.
fortunately, in dominant thrombotic microangiopathy, that is atypical HUS, jaundice is not a common clinical manifestation normally. Okay. But
Okay.
in severe preeclampsia, you can have liver dysfunction, and AFLP, you can have severe dysfunction. But in TMA, that is pure atypical HUS, jaundice is not that common.
And sir,
Even liver enzyme elevation is not that common.
And sir, in TTP,
Pardon me?
TTP, thrombotic purpura.
There you have, neurological symptoms, fever, neurological symptoms, and so on.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
And that's if you suspect that, you send for ADTM 13 level, and there also plasmapheresis is implicated, and the TTP can happen little early, even it can happen even during second trimester pregnancy itself. Of course, third trimester also it is any cause, but second trimester also it can happen.
Does anyone have any more questions? Okay, sir.
I'll ask one final question.
Yes.
Okay. When do you suspect a SLE flare in pregnancy? Can it happen during
in SLE flare, we have decrease. Normally in the pregnancy, C3 is high. So if decrease in the C3 with active sedimentations of the injury and with the DH,
yeah. So why I'm discussing that is that even though it is, I didn't discuss deliberately in this clinical scenario because there is nothing to suggest SLE flare. You have to remember. You have to remember, there are any number of instances where SLE has made its first appearance as postpartum acute kidney injury. So the urine sediment examination is very important. If there is plenty of RBCs, RBC cast, quickly go ahead doing a kidney biopsy. Number one. Number two, during pregnancy, even a normal C3 is abnormal because complement C3 synthesis and complement levels even near normal or even upper limit of normal, you have to view with suspicion in a non-SLE patient. Okay, you will not get a classical reduction in complement level because normally complement level goes up during pregnancy. That's it. So a word of caution that you have to always remember on the back of your mind. And when do you suspect TMA is that you are very, very sure about the BP profile during pregnancy. Absolutely, there was no rise in BP at all. And the hypertension is making its appearance for the first time after delivery. It's almost certain that you are dealing with TMA because postpartum eclampsia is there, but it is not that common. Postpartum eclampsia, again, it will settle down. It will not keep on going up. So hypertension making its appearance after delivery, the likelihood for thrombotic microangiopathy is pretty high. So in that situation, you have to do a peripheral smear very diligently and make a personal request to the person who does it, and you also have to visualize it. And again, a word of caution, just demonstration of 1 or 2 fragmented RBCs doesn't make it as MAHA. 1 or 2 fragmented RBCs can be there in even most of the other pathologies. And even DIC can have a few schistocytes here and there. But in classical TMA, the number of fragmented RBCs will be pretty high. So these are the points of interest. Okay. And finally, one question I'll ask.
Yes,
hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, only one question, but this will wind up.
Yes, sir.
first pregnancy, a young lady, first pregnancy, okay, and
Yes.
hypertension. During pregnancy, she develops hypertension, and that keeps on worsening, and potassium becomes low. Potassium
Okay.
becomes very low. And the family physician is pretty sure that she never had hypertension. She's so young. In a number of instances, BP was checked before her pregnancy. It was all normal. So the hypertension made its appearance for the first time after she became pregnant, accompanied by severe hypokalemia, warranting loads and loads of parenteral potassium supplementation. And whole thing becomes normal after the delivery is over.
No, sir.
Anybody? Any guess?
Renal artery stenosis, sir.
No, renal artery stenosis. Why BP was normal during pre-pregnancy state?
Well, the
So
patient developed
pregnancy
Gittelman.
related, pregnancy related low renin state, sir.
Pregnancy is high renin state.
Sir, if patient, if she developed Gittelman's or something along during.
No, I said after the pregnancy.
Hypertension.
After pregnancy,
Okay.
everything became absolutely normal. BP subsided, potassium normalized.
Pregnancy related hypertension.
No, just now we said no, aldosterone, even though aldosterone level is high during pregnancy, even though aldosterone causes sodium retention, fluid retention, hypertension does not happen in normal pregnancy. And again, despite there is hyperaldosteronism, progesterone, it causes aldosterone retention, so it will not cause hypokalemia.
Sir, PRL 810 mutation in gene.
Mutation is
PRL 810.
excellent. It is a mutated mineralocorticoid receptor syndrome.
Yes.
What is that?
Sir, during the PRL 810 is the gene that is responsible for because of which the progesterone acts as an anti-aldosterone during pregnancy. But if there is this mutation, it acts as an agonist.
Very excellent. So aldo receptor is, even though it's called aldosterone receptor, it is a cytosolic receptor. It is not specific for aldosterone alone. Any sterol can go and bind to it, right? Even glucocorticoid can bind to it, and it can mediate the same actions of transcription of sodium potassium ATPase channel and potassium ROMK channel, and so ENaC and so on. But normally it does not happen because cortisol is converted to cortisone. So cortisone cannot bind to it. Cortisol can bind to it, but cortisol is immediately converted to cortisone, which cannot bind to it. Similarly, other sterols, there are some protective mechanism for them to act on this aldo receptor. If there is a genetic mutation in this receptor in such a way, it favors progesterone can bind to it, and it can mediate exactly the action of aldosterone. And during pregnancy only, progesterone goes up. Okay, so that results in severe hypertension, uncontrollable resistant hypertension, refractory hypertension, and severe hypokalemia. And once pregnancy is over and the progesterone level comes down, everything will become normal. So this is called mutated mineralocorticoid receptor syndrome.
Sir, there is one more question.
Yeah.
Sorry for last. Srinder, you want to ask?
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Many a times we get confused between DIC and TMA.
Okay.
So, on the basis of schistocytes count, what is the exact cutoff? Is there any?
The regular DIC panel will be normal. You will not have hypofibrinogenemia. You will not have your PT APTT prolongation will not be there.
That's fine, sir. But sometimes we confuse about because the values are varying.
Again, I said most of the patients with the predominant DIC, there is no reason for the patient to have hypertension. In TMA, most of them will have very severe hypertension, particularly pregnancy-associated TMA. Hypertension will be very dominant, even though that is not a mandatory phenomenon, even though it is not included as a classical triad, in the classical triad. Practically, the practical wisdom that many a times in our department, the clue for TMA was the hypertension which is not subsiding after delivery, or hypertension making for first appearance after delivery. That's number one. And number two, your coagulation profile normal, including fibrinogen and PTA, PTT, and then significant number of schistocytes in the peripheral smear.
Okay, sir.
Of course, as I again said, there can be micro DIC and TMA, all can be coexisting. Many, in a given patient, particularly with jaundice, in a given patient, it is extremely difficult to pinpoint a particular pathology. At the maximum, you can say which is dominant. Okay.
So if there are no more questions, thanks a lot, sir. Thank you so much for taking out time for us. We hope to see you again if possible for some other case.
Okay, fine. Thank you. The presentation was fairly very good.
Thank you so much, sir.
A clear pass. Here and there, there are some corrections, but otherwise, I appreciate the way you presented and everything was fine. There was no major lapse.
Thank you, sir.
But you have to understand, but still there is a lot of scope for all of us, including myself, to read and learn more and more. It's always a joy to learn more and more, and we assume that we know, but actually we may not know so many things and so on. And pregnancy and the kidney, the complex relationship is, I always wonder at it. It's a real fascinating field, and what we know is not even the tip of a big iceberg. And all the best to you and all the participants. I wish you all success, not just in exam, but the entire life. Stay safe and keep cool. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.